Some minds don't come alive at sunrise. They come alive when the world finally goes quiet, for many night owls. Staying up late isn't a habit or a flaw. It's a psychological state that feels more natural than the day ever does, not because the night is mysterious or dramatic, but because it offers something the daytime rarely gives: mental room to breathe. Before we dive deeper, here's a simple question for you. Do you think more clearly during the day or at night? Comment below. Your answer reveals a lot about how your mind manages pressure and space. What makes night owls unique isn't the darkness. It's the shift in their internal environment. When social demands slow down, when messages stop coming through, when the noise of daily expectations fades, the brain transitions into a different mode. Thoughts become easier to process. Ideas organize themselves more naturally. And emotions that were pushed aside during the day finally rise into focus. Many people who prefer late hours describe a similar experience. Nighttime feels calmer. Not safer in a dramatic way, but simpler, quieter, less demanding. It's the absence of interruption that gives them presence of mind. This isn't universal, of course. Not every night owl becomes more creative or reflective at 2 a.m., but for a significant number of them, nighttime offers something their nervous system responds to: autonomy, not rebellion, not avoidance. Just a subtle sense of personal ownership over their time. During the day, responsibilities dictate the rhythm. At night, they decide the rhythm. Difference alone creates a powerful psychological pull. The mind shifts from reacting to the world to observing it, from what do I need to do next to what do I actually think and feel. And that shift is why the late hours can feel like home. Jesse Livermore, known for studying how people think under pressure, often highlighted a simple principle: people gain clarity when external noise decreases. This isn't about trading or markets, it's a psychological truth. When the crowd quiets down, the individual becomes easier to see. Night owls often encounter this without trying. The silence doesn't just remove distraction, it reveals what's been waiting underneath it. But here's the part most people overlook. The tendency to stay awake late is rarely random. There's usually an emotional pattern or internal rhythm behind it, something shaped by personality, stress response, mental habits, or daily pressure. Some are pulled toward creativity, some toward reflection. Some simply feel mentally sharper when others are winding down. Whatever the reason, it's rarely just a schedule issue. It's a psychological story, one that begins with a quiet pull toward, a time when the world stops demanding and starts allowing. And that's where the deeper exploration begins. And their own mental rhythm. Every night owl carries a quiet conflict inside them, a pull between who they have to be and who they actually are. This conflict doesn't show up loudly, doesn't come with dramatic breakdowns or emotional scenes. It shows up in small ways, in the hesitation to end the night, in the guilt of staying awake longer than planned, in the frustration of waking up tired, or in the relief that nighttime still feels like the only place where the mind can finally settle. Few people talk about it, but the inner struggle is real. The world operates on daytime rules, but their mind operates on a nighttime rhythm. And that mismatch creates a psychological pressure that night owls feel more deeply than they admit. On one hand, they know mornings matter. Jobs, responsibilities, routines. The world rewards early energy and structured habits. On the other hand, something inside them resists. Not out of laziness, not out of rebellion, but because their clearest thinking, truest emotions, and most authentic ideas show up after the world winds down. It's like having two selves living in the same body. A daytime self that must perform, respond, adjust, and keep pace. A nighttime self that finally gets to think, breathe, and exist without judgment. This split creates a quiet internal tension, a constant negotiation between practicality and authenticity. The daytime self says, "You need to sleep. You have responsibilities tomorrow." The nighttime self whispers back, "But this is the only time that feels like mine." Psychologists often describe this as identity-based. Time preference, the idea that people naturally gravitate toward the hours where they feel most aligned with themselves. Night owls don't choose late hours blindly. They choose the hours where their thoughts feel coherent and their emotional world feels reachable. But this alignment comes with a cost, because the modern world isn't built for late minds. It's built for early schedules, morning productivity, and daytime availability. So the night owl lives in two incompatible systems, trying to satisfy both. Internally, this creates pressure, trying to function in a timeline that doesn't match their natural rhythm, guilt feeling behind. Even when they're not, confusion, wondering why nighttime feels right. When the world says it's wrong, identity conflict, trying to reconcile who they are with who they're expected to be. Silent frustration, because no one else sees the emotional logic behind their schedule. This conflict is not immaturity. It's not irresponsibility. It's psychology. A tension created when the internal wiring of a mind doesn't match external expectations. And Jesse Livermore understood this kind of psychological split, not about sleep, but about rhythm. He often emphasized that people make their best decisions when they act in alignment with their natural pattern, instead of forcing themselves into the world's pattern. For night owls, their clearest mental lane opens at night, even if the outside world disagrees. But here's the real complication. This inner conflict doesn't remain emotional. It slowly becomes behavioral. A night owl doesn't just stay up late because the night feels good. They stay up late because the day feels incomplete without that mental space. And that positioning leads directly into the next major piece of the puzzle. The psychological trap that forms when late-night clarity begins to overpower daytime structure. Every habit begins as a choice. But some habits slowly become a trap, especially when they meet an emotional need. For many night owls, staying up late starts innocently. A bit of quiet time, a moment to think, a few minutes of scrolling or planning or reflecting. But over time, those quiet minutes turn into hours. And the hours turn into a pattern that feels both comforting and impossible to escape. This is the psychological trap. The night offers exactly what the mind craves, while the consequences appear the next morning. And because the reward comes immediately, peace, clarity, relief, freedom, the brain naturally chooses the night again and again, even if the logical part knows the cost. The day feels structured, demanding, sometimes overwhelming. The night feels open, calm, and emotionally available. So the mind attaches comfort to the late hours and begins to depend on them. Psychologists call this pattern delayed emotional compensation. When the daytime drains a person's energy, the night becomes the place to restore it. But here's the trap. The restoration feels so good that it becomes difficult to let the night end. And the deeper the comfort becomes, the harder the cycle is to break. Many night owls experience this without realizing it. They promise themselves they'll sleep early. But as nighttime approaches, they feel a mental shift, a spark of alertness, a wave of ideas, or a sense of internal space they didn't have all day. Suddenly, they don't want the night to end. They're not avoiding sleep. They're avoiding losing the only hours that feel emotionally free. This creates a psychological loop. Daytime pressure builds, nighttime offers relief. Relief reinforces staying awake, morning brings regret. Regret adds more daytime pressure, night feels even more necessary. A self-reinforcing pattern, comfort at night, stress in the morning. And the mind begins to internalize a subtle message. I only feel like myself when the world sleeps. Over time, this becomes a belief, not just a habit. This is where Jesse Livermore's perspective becomes incredibly relevant. He often described how people fall into cycles because they respond to short-term emotional comfort instead of long-term clarity. Not about sleep, but about human behavior. Whenever immediate relief feels stronger than future consequences, the mind begins to repeat the behavior automatically. Night owls aren't weak. They're not irresponsible. They re-caught in a psychological feedback loop where the reward of nighttime clarity outweighs the responsibility of morning reality. And the trap becomes even stronger when nighttime becomes an identity, a place where the person feels more creative, more honest, more present, more in control. Because once the mind associates nighttime with authenticity, breaking the habit feels like losing a piece of themselves. But beneath this trap lies an even deeper layer, a moment almost every night owl recognizes. The moment the clock hits a certain hour, the world is silent. The mind is awake. They whisper to themselves, just a little more time. And that is exactly where the story moment begins, the pivotal emotional turning point that shapes the entire late-night cycle. To understand why night owls think the way they do, you have to understand how the mind behaves under pressure, and few observers understood that better than Jesse Livermore. Livermore wasn't a sleep researcher. He wasn't a neuroscientist. But he was a master observer of human behavior, especially the patterns people fall into when emotion overrides logic. And the way night owls attach themselves to late hours reflects many of the same psychological principles he studied his entire life. Livermore believed in a simple, powerful idea. People make their clearest decisions when they are separated from noise. Not literal noise, psychological noise, the kind created by expectations, responsibilities, deadlines, and social pressure. The daytime is full of noise, the nighttime is free from it. Night owls naturally drift toward the hours where the internal world becomes easier to hear. It's not because they want to run away from the day, but because they want to return to themselves. Livermore would call this moving back into your own lane, a psychological zone where a person thinks more independently, more calmly, and more intentionally. But he also warned about something else, something night owls fall into without noticing. When the environment feels comfortable, the mind stops measuring consequences. This was a theme he witnessed repeatedly in markets, in people, in behavior. Comfort blinds clarity. And when comfort becomes predictable, the behavior becomes automatic. This is precisely the mental loop many night owls get caught in. The nighttime feels emotionally aligned with who they are, so aligned that the brain stops considering what tomorrow demands. Livermore would view this as a classic imbalance between short-term psychological reward and long-term personal strategy. At night, the reward feels immediate. Mental quiet, emotional breathing room, creativity, reflection, freedom of focus. Meanwhile, the cost, fatigue, disrupted routines, reduced daytime performance appears later, which makes it psychologically weaker. The mind always gravitates toward the reward it can feel right now. This, Livermore believed, is how habits harden through emotional reinforcement rather than rational choice. But he wasn't pessimistic about it. He believed that once a person recognizes their internal patterns, they can regain control over them. And for night owls, his philosophy would translate to something like this: follow the rhythm that gives you clarity, but let's let it cost you the life you retrying to build. In other words, nighttime clarity is valuable. Nighttime self-awareness is real. Nighttime authenticity is powerful. But if these moments start to replace sleep, productivity, or mental balance, the cost quietly outweighs the reward. Livermore often said people must observe themselves with the same discipline they use to observe the world. Night owls especially benefit from this mindset, noticing when nighttime becomes a tool and when it becomes a trap. This perspective opens the door to the next part of the story, a moment that many night owls experience without ever putting it into words. A moment where the pattern becomes real, emotional, and unforgettable. That moment lives in Section 5. The story moment that shows exactly how this psychology plays out in a real life. It always starts the same way, with one small decision that doesn't look like a decision at all. At 11:47 p.m., the apartment is silent. The street outside is quiet, just the steady hum of distant traffic and the soft glow of streetlights leaking through the blinds. Evan sits at his desk, laptop still open, a half-finished cup of coffee beside him. He told himself tonight would be different. No late-night scrolling, no late-night thinking, no late night, just 10 more minutes. He even set an alarm earlier, not to wake up, but to go to sleep. But as the alarm went off, he felt that familiar shift, that internal click that only night owls understand. A strange alertness settling into the mind. Not energy, not excitement. Something quieter, something steadier. A mental clarity he hadn't felt all day. And that's when the same thought slipped in. I'll go to bed after I finish this one thing. The one thing becomes 3 things. Then 5. Then ideas start showing up, sharp, connected, almost effortless. Thoughts he couldn't access at 3 p.m. suddenly feel simple at 1 a.m. He opens a new tab, writes a few lines, deletes them, writes them again. Not because he's procrastinating, but because the night finally gives him a version of himself he actually recognizes. Meanwhile, the daytime version of him, the tired one, the distracted one, the overwhelmed one, feels far away, like a character he slips into instead of someone he truly is. By 2:12 a.m., Evan isn't chasing productivity. He's chasing the feeling, the quiet, the control, the emotional space. the sense that the night answers only to him. Hours pass unnoticed. He looks at the clock. 3:09 a.m. And that's when the guilt begins to creep in. Not loudly, not enough to stop him. Just a small whisper. You promised yourself you wouldn't do this again. But the whisper is no match for the peace he feels in this hour. A peace he hasn't found anywhere else. There's a moment, a familiar one, where he pauses. Hands hovering above the keyboard, and stares at the clock like it can negotiate with him. Its logic says sleep. His mind replies not yet. Because the truth is something he's never said out loud. Nighttime isn't an escape. It's the only time he feels like he's living on his own terms. This is the emotional core of the night owl cycle. Not rebellion, not chaos, but a deeply personal moment of alignment. A moment when their thoughts finally catch up to them. A moment when the world stops demanding. A moment when their emotional life becomes accessible instead of buried under tasks, noise, and expectations. Evan finally closes the laptop at 4:03 a.m. He doesn't feel regret yet. That will come tomorrow. The yawns, the mistakes, the fog, the promise that he'll definitely sleep early tonight. But right now, in this moment, the night feels worth the cost. And this is where the story shifts into something deeper, because every late night moment like this leads to another step in the psychological cycle. The emotional low point, when the consequences finally show up, not just in the body, but in the identity. But here's the part most people never see. Your night owls. The turning point usually comes quietly. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a slow realization that hits sometime between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. It's that moment when they look at the clock. And suddenly the peace that felt comforting an hour ago now feels like a weight on their chest. Because the truth is, nighttime gives them freedom, but it also steals something back. The world wakes up early, responsibilities wake up early, expectations wake up early. So while their mind wakes up at night, their life still runs on daytime rules. And that clash, that internal push, pull, is the moment where every night owl hits the same emotional wall. Why do I feel most alive when the rest of my life demands the opposite? That's the low point, the quiet frustration, silent guilt, the part they never say out loud. And it's exactly here where the story shifts, because understanding this moment is what leads to the rule, the breakthrough, the part that changes everything. Here's the shift every night owl eventually discovers. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. You don't have to fight your wiring. You just have to structure around it. Because the problem was never you stay up late. The real problem was you trying to live a 9 a.m. life with a 2 a.m. mind. And once this clicks, everything changes. Night owls who finally find balance all follow a version of one simple rule. Protect your peak hours wherever they naturally fall. For some people, peak focus is at noon. For others, it's 9 p.m. For you, maybe it's 1:47 a.m. when the world goes quiet and your brain finally stops buffering. The lesson is this. Instead of forcing yourself to fit society's rhythm, you intentionally design your routines around the hours when your mind is sharpest. That means saving creative work for nighttime, doing low-energy tasks during the day, using daylight hours for responsibilities, not deep thinking, and giving yourself permission to be different without apologizing for it. This is the breakthrough. Your brain isn't wrong. Your schedule was. Once you switch from fighting yourself to working with yourself, you stop feeling behind and start feeling in control. Here's where everything becomes real, because psychology only matters when it turns into behavior. And behavior only matters when it turns into results. Today's world is built around early schedules. Schools, corporate offices, bank hours, government hours. Almost everything says be functional by 9 a.m. or you're doing life wrong. But the truth, modern life has quietly evolved to fit night owls more than ever before. Late-night creativity isn't a disadvantage anymore. It's a superpower in a world that now rewards remote work, freelancing, digital entrepreneurship, 24/7's online markets, asynchronous collaboration, creative industries, tech jobs with flexible hours, global teams that operate across time zones. This is the first era in human history where a person who thinks clearly at 2 a.m. can build a career, a business, a life without needing to become a morning person. And here's the deeper psychology behind it. Night owls tend to have stronger idea fluency, heightened abstract thinking, greater tolerance for long periods of solitude, and sharper lay tower emotional honesty. These traits map perfectly onto modern roles like writers, editors, programmers, designers, traders, analysts, entrepreneurs, content creators, people who thrive when the world sleeps. Finally live in a world where that rhythm can be used instead of punished. But the real conclusion is this: being a night owl isn't a personality flaw. It's a neurological pattern that becomes powerful once you stop resisting it. The moment someone understands their peak hours, honors them, and structures their life around them, they stop feeling like they're failing mornings. Start realizing they're excelling at something else. And that's the part society never teaches. You don't succeed by forcing yourself into someone else's timing. You succeed by doubling down on the hours where your mind comes alive. Because real productivity doesn't come from the clock. It comes from alignment. And for millions of people, that alignment doesn't happen at sunrise, it happens just after midnight. Here's the truth. Most people never realize until much later in life. Your brain has a schedule, even if society doesn't approve of it. When you try to force yourself into a rhythm that isn't yours, everything feels harder than it should. Your focus feels artificial. Your creativity feels blocked. Your motivation feels inconsistent. Your emotions feel heavier. Your whole day feels slightly off, like you're living half a second out of sync with yourself. But the moment you stop fighting your natural timing, something powerful happens. Life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a pattern. You think clearer because you're not forcing clarity. Create better because you're not squeezing ideas on command. You feel more yourself because you're not pretending to be someone else's definition of productive. That's the deeper psychology. Behind night owls, they don't crave darkness. They crave alignment. They crave the hours where their thoughts stop whispering and start speaking plainly. Most people spend their whole lives trying to fix their schedule. But people who finally understand themselves realize something else entirely. It was never about fixing the schedule. It was about understanding the mind that runs it. If there's one takeaway from this entire breakdown, it's this. You're not broken for being different. You're not lazy for working when others sleep. You're not unmotivated. You're miscategorized. And the moment you understand your rhythm, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What if this is what's right about me?" Because for many night owls, late hours aren't an escape. They're home.